Hey everybody, this is the 20-gallon tank I keep for my wife, and tonight we're going to do a simple water change. I don't even really think I need to get in there and wipe the glass down or anything. I did a pretty thorough cleaning last time I was in here. I don't do a lot with this tank. It's one of those out of sight, out of mind kind of tanks. So I'm going to try to have a little bit of a look at it tonight, even though there's not really much going on or a lot to talk about in here. Again, this is one of my more simplistic tanks. And you can see the water level's a bit low. It's going to need the filter pads changed out. And when I get in there, I might need a little bit of a gravel vacuuming. But when I gravel vac in tanks like this that are planted, I have to be really gentle about it. You can't really get in there and grind around down in the gravel. You tear up the roots of the plants. And this tank has planted substrate in it. And it is substrate that is stratified. It's got fine particles and coarser particles, and it's designed so that the fine particles settle down towards the bottom and the coarser particles rise more towards the top. And so when you get in there and you disturb that and you get it all scrunched around with the gravel vac, it's kind of breaking up the purpose of the way it's designed to function. It's designed to allow water to flow through the surface, which actually helps with your biofiltration, and then the bottom of it gets a little more compact and dense and makes for better rooting material. So really can't do a lot in the way of gravel vacuuming in most of my planted tanks, but I do try to do a superficial vac and draw a bunch of the mulm and stuff up out of the corners and whatnot. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with it. Again, this is really just to have a look at this tank. I don't shoot video of it very often, but it is a pretty tank and it is some pretty fish in there. So here's your before. And there's your after. So I did it exactly what I said I was going to do. A simple water change. I changed out the filter pad and did a little bit of gravel vacuuming, but nothing serious. One of the more serious things I did was I removed a bunch of Java moss. I usually take Java fern out of my tanks. I've got a lot of that everywhere. You can even see a fair amount of it in this tank. What's in the middle of the tank and what's on the left is Java fern. But I have a bunch of Java moss growing in this tank. It's one of those plants that once it gets in a tank, it's just kind of in there, and it's really hard to get out. It grows all over everything. If you look closely, you can see all those little green tendrils that are crawling all over everything. That is the Java moss. I ripped a bunch of it out of this end, but I also tore a bunch of it off the back glass that was growing, literally growing and crawling across the glass. So I got all that out of there. And the only other thing really worth talking about now that we're done with the water change and I was able to actually get in the tank and have a look around is all of the crud you can see that's growing on the rocks and the plants and everything. I'm going to be shooting a video here in the fairly near future about my use of ChemiClean. Every now and again I'll have somebody mention how it just seems like I'm always using ChemiClean. I'm always talking about putting ChemiClean in my tanks and so on and so forth. And I know it may seem that way sometimes, but I really don't. And once I actually talk about it, it'll make sense to what I'm saying here. But I am going to talk about the ChemiClean again for a moment because I think it's great stuff and I do use it when I need it. And I honestly don't know when I used it in this tank, but I must have used it fairly recently because you can see all that brown crud. That's not living growth. That's not living offlux as far as I can tell. When I sort of scraped it with the gravel vac, you can see where I scraped some of it off the rock. I just wasn't able to really get in there. If I was in there with a soft bristle brush or something, I probably would have been able to get that cleaned up quite nicely. But with just having the gravel vac, you can only scrape so much with the rounded plastic edge. But that stuff came right out of there and went right on up and out of the tank. I've got more crud growing on the leaves and stuff. A little bit of that reddish looking stuff. That is probably a little bit of the red cyanobacteria starting to grow in the tank again. That's not unusual. But this cruddy kind of, again, just the growth that develops in a tank after a while, that gets cleaned out of your tank just as much from the ChemiClean treatment as the cyanobacteria does. So it's not only a treatment for dealing with problems in your tank, it really is just a regular maintenance kind of thing that from time to time, if you've got a tank that's just well lived in and you get a bunch of growth on stuff, the ChemiClean will really get in there and clean that up. So in this case, again, I don't remember if I've done that to this tank recently or what the deal is. I've got red growth in there that looks fairly fresh and alive, but I've got all that other stuff that looks like it's, been killed off by a ChemiClean treatment. So, I don't know, maybe I'll go back and look at the playlist and see when the last time we did any work in this tank was, and maybe I did get in there with the ChemiClean treatment, and that's why everything looks so dead and cleared out like that. But either way you slice it, I was able to get a lot of that off of that rock, and there was a bunch of it that had sort of piled up in the right-hand corner down here where, again, this Java moss had sort of just grown all over this area, and a bunch of gunk and everything was just sort of collected and trapped underneath of that, and I was able to get that out of there as well. So there you go. Like I said, not a whole lot to look at, but I just figured I'd chat for a little while we had a look at this tank. It is a pretty one. I've got my long fin black skirt tetras in this tank too. I really do like the black skirt tetras. I know they're a fairly common fish, and I have them in a lot of my tanks, but they're a common fish. They're inexpensive, they're easy to get, and I really like them. I like their behavior, I like the way they look. There's just nothing about them I don't like. I like their size and everything. So these long fin ones are really cool. I really enjoy the long fin skirt tetras even more than the regular old black skirts. So there you go. Once again, just a look at the tank that I'd set up for my wife to enjoy. So we call this one my wife's tank. I have to be careful how I label that or I get demonetized. So this is probably just going to get called my 20-gallon tank or something like that. But make sure you're subscribed, and don't forget I do call this one my wife's tank. That's the playlist. So I'll see you real soon in the next one.